Okay, so we have finished our parallel processing. We've done our saturation, our stereo delay, and our reverb. And so we've finished what to me is kind of like the second phase of the mixing process. And that leaves our last two things here, which is double tracks and echo moments. Now, double tracks itself is a fairly big category. We're going to look at lots of different ways to handle double tracks, but don't feel like you need to do all of the things that I'm going to show you with double tracks. Think of this more as just options to consider. Maybe you try them all, but then maybe if you used all of them, it would sound ridiculous. So you just pick and choose which bits of it sound good. And so here we are back in Logic. And double tracking is really quite simple. At its simplest, it simply means recording another take of your vocal and then playing it at the same time as your original vocal. So you'll see I've got this extra track here that I'll go ahead and power on. Now I'm going to turn off all of these extra parallel effects that we were working on just for now so that we can better compare these two together. So what I have here is my original take, and then actually a whole bunch of other takes that I had. Now, if you just play those at the same time, you now have a double track. You do what you want. Listen to them together. You do what you want. And you notice what it does compared to one by itself. You do what you want. You do what you want. It immediately gives it a little bit of depth, a little bit of width, a little bit of almost texture is probably a better term for it. And the reason it does that is because these are not exactly the same thing. Compare that to if I just added a new audio track here, and if I just copied my original vocal, and I just play these two at the same time. You do what you want. You do what... You'll notice if I take this away, the only real difference is you do what you want. You do what... It's just a little bit louder or softer, but it's not actually a different texture. It's just purely a volume change when we play the exact same track on top of itself. Whereas when I bring in this track, you do what you want, it gives some texture because there's a little bit of variety in the way I performed this take compared to this take. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point also that you do want your takes to be as identical as possible. For example, if I let this play a little bit further, you'll notice that there's some moments where I'm not quite in time. You do what you want. You do what you want. Do you hear that right there on the second U? You do what you want to do. Now they're starting to tear, right? They're not quite with each other. You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. Even though when you want right there wasn't quite in time. So don't just throw any random take on top of there. You really want them to be as close to each other as possible. Otherwise, it does a really weird thing to the listener, and it tends to be not very pleasant sounding. So try to get takes that are as close as possible. Now, what if you don't have another take? What if like this was the only take you've got, or this is the full comp that you made, and like that's the best of the best? If you were to put something else in there, it's just going to sound like garbage. Well, the first thing I'll say to that is maybe what you have isn't actually garbage. Maybe you actually could pull together another comp from some of your other takes, even if it was just by way of choosing different bits. You know, for example, over here, if I had this and maybe this or whatever, and maybe I had a little bit of this take here and some of this guy, whatever. You know, that's one version of the comp. But if I were to do another comp that was different from this one, I might be able to pull together another worthwhile comp that I can use as my double track, but maybe not. And so if you can't do that, then there is another option. We can essentially create an artificial double track. And the way that we're going to do that is actually very similar to the way that we handled all of our parallel effects over here. So now before I do that, I'm going to delete this extra track I made so we don't get confused. And so here's our original vocal right here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn back on all of the plugins. And I'm going to turn on all of this stuff as well. And I'm going to add one more bus, or one more send, I should say. And I'll use bus 5 this time. And I'm going to rename this one double track. And then we'll increase the send level to 0 dBs. And so on this track, we're going to do two big things to make it sound a little bit different, just a little bit from our original track here. We're going to try to change a little bit of the timing. We're going to try to change a little bit of the tone. And then we're also going to do just a little tiny bit to make it a little bit difference in pitch. And so we can do all those things with just some of the plugins inside of Logic. So if we start with timing, we can go to our delay, and then I'm going to use the stereo delay, but you could also do this with the tape delay. And the reason I'm going to do it with the stereo delay is because I'm going to treat this track over here as a stereo track, which it is. And I want the left side to be a little bit different than the right side, which means I'm actually going to get kind of two double tracks for the price of one. I'll have my original track right here, and then because I've got a different left from the right, I get essentially two double tracks. And so over here, we're going to do a similar sort of thing that we did with the stereo delay, where I set this relatively low, but not super, super low, because if we go too low, it tends to create some phasing issues. So we're going to go pretty low with these. And then I'm going to turn the feedback all the way down. We don't want any sort of feedback coming through whatsoever.
You do what you want.
And you see already we've got that kind of width sort of idea created. I might do a little bit of filtering here so that they sound just slightly different from each other.
You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning.
All right, and so that works really well. But I do want to show you, if I power that off, how I can do a similar sort of thing with the tape delay. But the tape delay allows me to do something that I can't do in the stereo delay. So I'm going to turn that tempo sync off, turn our delay time down pretty low again. But then what's nice about the tape delay, oh, sorry, we got to turn our feedback all the way down. What's great about the tape delay, which we want 100% wet. Sorry, I keep forgetting all these little details here. What's nice about the tape delay is this modulation area. So what this does is this essentially moves stuff around just a little bit over the course of time, which is really what we want with a double track. We want it to be slightly different, but not always exactly the same amount of slightly different. So I'll set my delay time pretty low again. And then I'm going to bring up the LFO intensity. Now, if I go super high with this, you're going to really hear it, especially if I turn up the rate.
You do what you want. You do it.
That's weird.
What you want to do. You do what you want when you want.
Right, but if we do it fairly slow and fairly low in intensity, let's bring this guy back in.
You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want.
It really sounds like we have two different takes. Now I can also add a little bit of saturation here and also change the filtering a little bit, maybe remove a little bit of the lows, a little bit of the highs. And this will help it, again, sound tonally a little bit different, maybe a little more spread too.
You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. You do what you want. You do what you want to do.
And just like before, we will dial this into taste. That might be too much.
You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want.
Great. Now, in addition to that, so in one plugin, we were able to change the timing a little bit and then also change the tone a little bit between this and this. We can also change the pitch just a little bit as well if we go in and add a pitch plugin. Now, we could do this either with pitch correction. So the nice thing about using pitch correction is if we do it with a fairly slow response time, and remember we got to set our key correctly, so we're correcting to the right pitches, what that will do is it will push our singing to more closely to these specific notes, and in the process it will force it to be a slightly different pitch compared to the original, especially if our response time is relatively slow.
You do what you want to do. You do what you want.
And you could put the pitch correction plugin before the delay if you wanted.
You do what you want to do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning.
Compare that to the same thing without. I'll mute the the double track.
You do what you wanna do. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you.
And if we wanted to get really crazy, we could even add in this additional stereo delay after everything.
You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
If we tighten this pitch up a little bit more, it'll be a little bit more noticeable, the difference.
You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. You do what you want. You do.
Here's without it.
You do what you wanna. You do.
And as always, all these decisions should not be made in solo. Oh, and I probably should turn off my... Forgot about this. We should turn off that other actual double take. Actual double track.
Do what you wanna do. You do what you want.
Here's without it.
You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you want.
So again, you can hear it just gives it a little bit more texture, I think of it as being a little bit thicker. It also tends to widen it a little bit and gives it an overall just bigger sound. It's a great sort of thing to use for choruses compared to verses, right? So maybe without, if we take all this stuff out, here's a much cleaner, straightforward verse sound.
You do what you wanna do.
Maybe with a little saturation.
You do what you wanna do. You do what you want.
And then we bring in everything else for the chorus.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
There we go. Now, that's all fine and well, and that's one way to handle double tracking. But I want to go another step further and get even a little bit more creative with it. To do that, we're going to need to create an actual another separate track, which we could do by duplicating, but I really like using the sends because it allows me to feed in all the exact same processing that we got here. And so I'm going to add an additional bus here. And I should mention there are multiple ways to go about doing what I'm going to show you here. I'm doing it this way mostly because it's just simpler and it will get you to a result pretty quickly. So I'm going to just use bus 10. As always, double click on it, press 0, enter, and I'm going to rename this track Double Up. And then over in this track, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to pitch. I'm going to choose either the pitch shifter or the vocal transformer. They're slightly different and we'll cover each one. So here's my pitch shifter. I'm going to set this one to be plus 12 since we're doing the double up. I'm going to set the mix to be 100%. And then let's just take a listen. If I solo this track, it's going to sound pretty ridiculous.
You do what you want. You do what you want to do.
Now, I realize that sounds pretty silly. Let's listen to the difference if I do pitch tracking. It's going to be subtly different.
You do what you want. You do what you want to do.
Again, we don't want to listen to this in solo mode, but I'm just doing it this way so you can hear it. Now, that alone sounds pretty stupid, at least if that's all we did. However, if we put a little bit of EQ after it, so that it's not quite so bright, so it doesn't stick out quite so much. We'll just use a high shelf here and pull it down a little bit.
You do what you want.
And then if we mix it into taste, so I turn my solo off, and then just gradually bring this in.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. You do what you want. You do what you want.
And you see, it's just a subtle extra little layer that we put on top. Now, if I wanted to get even more crazy, I could then treat this just like I did my double tracks, and I could put a stereo delay or sample delay on it as well, which will now give it some width. So if I turn my tempo sync off, do the same thing where I bring my delay times down a little bit. This will give me the effect of pushing that octave higher further out to the sides. Turn my feedback all the way down.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
Maybe we filter out quite a bit so we get just the mid-range.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want.
Turn it down just a little bit more. And I think I might try the vocals algorithm instead.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want.
If I turn it off,
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want.
and of course we can do the exact same thing, but the opposite if we add another bus. And we'll rename this guy to Double Down. And we will do the same thing. We'll use our pitch shifter. Or actually, this time, instead of the pitch shifter, let me show you the vocal transformer, because it has something interesting on it that's just worth knowing about, period, regardless if you're using it for this double tracking idea. Oh, I got to remember to increase my send level, otherwise we won't get signal in this actual track over here. And I'm going to solo it so we can hear it. And I'm going to pitch it down -12. So remember, -12 gives us an octave below. +12 is an octave up. If you wanted to go 2 octaves, that would be 24 up or 24 down. Rarely do I find that works well. So we'll go with just 1 octave down for now. And here's what we get.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
Now, I find that the vocal transformer tends to be much harsher sounding. But what's nice about the vocal transformer is we also have a format control. So if I pull this down,
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning.
and so if we do a similar sort of thing where we go ahead and put an EQ in here, try to pull out some of that harshness. Oh, come back. There we go.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you want.
Get rid of the really low stuff.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do.
Listen to it in the track.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
And then if we want to push it out to the sides, just like we did before, we can add yet another delay. And we'll grab our, we'll go ahead and do stereo delay again. And we'll turn off our tempo sync, set these guys down pretty low again. Maybe I'll do a little higher for the octave down. Remember to turn your feedback down.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
And then we mix it into taste.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
Now, if you wanted to, you could also theoretically send these also to the same effects that you have for your main vocal. So for example, if I wanted this to have saturation, I could also add a bus 1 send to it.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want when you want. And there's no reasoning. You do what you want. You do what you want.
If I wanted it to have reverb as well, same thing, just add the bus to that track. And then now I'm not going to bring this all the way up to 0 because now this is essentially controlling how much reverb I get for this vocal double.
You do what you want.
But remember, we can use reverb to push something further back in the mix. And so that's why I'm adding reverb on this, is so that it tucks it a little further behind the lead vocal, which is kind of our center main vocal.
You do what you want.
Which is also why I turned down the saturation a little bit.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do.
Now compare the difference. No, hold up. Before we do that, sorry. The high vocal is still just a little bit too much in our face. I'm going to take off a little bit more of the high end here. And even a little more of this guy. And then, I don't think there's anything down there, but let's just chop it out.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want.
Now here's without those 2 doubles.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
With them back in.
You do what you want. You do.
Now you do need to be careful with this double down track in terms of now that you've moved it down an octave, you might end up getting a lot of pile up in terms of frequencies down here in the low and low mids. So for example, if I solo this track,
You do what you want.
you can see there's just a ton of energy happening down here. So you may need to pull some of that out, particularly when you hear it in the whole mix. I'm going to go a little extreme with it.
You do what you want.
And listen to it back with everything else.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
Here's without it.
You do what you want.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can tell really obviously, but it's definitely getting in the way of some of the stuff that's happening down in the low mids, especially primarily your actual lead vocal.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do. You do what you want.
All right, so that is our double tracks. Before we go, I want to just mention one last thing. I'm going to turn off all the double tracks for now.
You do what you want.
And just mention, we used this vocal transformer here to pitch it down an octave, and then we changed the format. But you can also do that same exact idea if you add a vocal transformer to your lead vocal. And then instead of pitching it, just change the format itself, and sometimes even just a little bit.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
Creates some really interesting sounding stuff.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
And I'm sure you've heard this in other records that are out there right now. If you push it too far, it sounds a little weird. But also something you could use to great effect for effect moments where you just want something to sound interesting for a moment.
You do what you want. You do what you wanna do.
And if you're wondering, yes, you can automate this as well. It's just a parameter just like anything else. So if you went into automation, went to our vocal transformer and changed the format, we can automate that to go down or up or however we want it to go.
You do what you want.
You do what you wanna do.
And there's no reasoning.
So just another idea from a creative standpoint. And so there you go. If we throw everything together, now it's going to sound probably a little ridiculous, probably a little too much.
You do what you want. You do what you want.
You do what you wanna do.
But there you go. That is double tracks in Logic.